average is not invited. Not if you're holding your company off-site in Las Vegas. We aren't on friendly terms with the bare minimum, and unenthusiastic is uninvited. Las Vegas's creative energy and world-class hospitality want to bring your company off-site to crazy new heights. That's why fear-based leadership is afraid of Vegas. And boring won't be there, but it will be watching the meeting recordings later. Plan for the extraordinary at vegasmeansbusiness.com.
So now I want to bring on two of the smartest guys I know on politics, and they've been friends of mine for, over 30 years. Ralph Reed, who runs the Faith and Freedom Foundation, and John Fund, who we worked together at the Wall Street Journal for, I think, 10 years. John was on the editorial board, as was I, and we also worked together at National Review. He also is one of the writers of the Unleash Prosperity Hotline. By the way, if you're not getting the Unleash Prosperity, why the hell not? Because it's absolutely free. It costs you nothing. And it's the best way to become the smartest person in the room when it comes to finance and politics. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. John Fund, by the way, I want to ask you both. So John, I'll start with you. Who's your favorite president? Who are two or three of the greatest presidents?
Oh, give me two or three. Well, obviously the ones you mentioned, but I would say Ronald Reagan, Calvin Coolidge, and Donald Trump is moving up that list fast.
Wow. Okay, Ralph.
For me, Lincoln is always going to be number one because he saved the Union, and he was the first Republican president and helped build the Republican Party. Reagan, I'm a Reaganite to my core, and I agree with John. I think Trump is, by the time this is done, he's going to be in that top.
Well, he wants to be, Ralph. I mean, it's funny because whenever, it's just a quick funny story. When Arthur Laffer and I would go see Trump, and we'd go see him every few months in his first term. We've seen him once or twice, since the election. He was always asking Laffer, Ralph and John, about Reagan. He was fascinated with Reagan. And, it was the old, what would Reagan do? And there was a bit of, look, Reagan is a great role model for Trump, right? But I think, guys, that Trump wants to go down in history as an even greater president, Ronald Reagan. I don't know if he can accomplish that, but, I don't know, Ralph, you think that's possible?
Well, I think it is possible. I really honestly do. And I'll tell you why. It reminds me of a story about Reagan that both of you may know. I don't know if all your listeners, Steve, know it, but it's a great story. And it's after Reagan had run in 1976 against Gerald Ford and lost. Nobody thought he'd get another bite at the apple. Nobody thought he'd be able to run again. It's amazing now to think this, but he was considered too old. And he was at the time only 65.
Yes.
And he called up one of his top foreign policy advisors, and he said, I'd like for you to come to Bel Air and meet with me. He goes, I've been thinking, and if I run again, I don't want to do this for anything other than a really big reason, and I've been giving a lot of thought to it. And it was Judge William Clark, who later went on to be his national security advisor.
Yes, that's right.
Was very close to him. And he came in to meet with him, and he goes, look, I've got this idea on the Cold War. I want to run it by you. He goes, sure. What is it? He goes, we win, they lose.
Yeah.
He said, what do you think?
Yeah, that goes a lot beyond the old containment. It goes.
See, Steve, that's my point. You see, there was all this conventional wisdom. There was all this conventional thinking of peaceful coexistence, right? And détente and contain them. No, we're not going to contain them. We're going to defeat them. And it was Reagan's ability as a leader and as a visionary to conceptualize a world that others could not see. And I see that in Trump. I honestly do. I'm not a sycophant, but I see it. I see it in the Middle East. I see it in Asia. I see it in his views on the economy. You see it all the time, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's Ralph Reed from Faith and Freedom Foundation. So John Fund, you were a skeptic of Trump's when he first started running, as many people were. Most people were skeptical. But he is, I'm looking at these numbers. It was just reported that Americans are more optimistic about the economy today, John, than they've been any time in the last 30 years.
Oh, look, measured through the economic lens, Donald Trump is clearly becoming a powerhouse president. I've known Trump for 42 years, Steve. I do think that despite the fact that he has become much more conservative, his instincts are very good, and he certainly knows how to negotiate. Despite all of that, his personality and his narcissism does get into the way, and he trips over himself still. So, right. Yes, Trump is great, but Trump is also flawed and can make mistakes, and that's why we have to call balls and strikes on him. He's hitting home runs, and he's hitting 30 base hits, but we also have to remember sometimes he gets ahead of himself.
Yeah, I mean, look, I always say that there's a good and a bad about Donald Trump, and it is true that in many ways, Ralph, Trump, can be his own worst enemy. But I've never seen anything quite like what's happened in the last 3 weeks. I think almost all our listeners would agree with that. I don't like everything he's done, but I'd say I like about 80% of it. But this guy's acting like he knows, Ralph, that he's got really, 2 years to really make his mark on history and change America, because, 2 years from now, we'll be talking about the next election. So he seems to be in a hurry. And the American people seem to love what he's doing.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been a first, 3-week or 4-week period like this since Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in during the depths of the Depression.
Right.
And in many ways, I'm not necessarily comparing the two. Certainly economically, we're not nearly in that kind of situation. 25% unemployment, deflationary pressures, et cetera. But I think Biden left such a catastrophe.
He did.
At the border, around the world, the out-of-control spending. I would defer to your judgment, but I think a lot of the economy is a sugar high based on this completely out-of-control federal spending, and there's evidence that we really do need some significant economic reform. And I think the other thing is, even though I would have never said this in 2020, I thought the opposite. I think it was a blessing in disguise. I'm not glad it happened, but a blessing in disguise that he didn't make it in 2020, and that he got to serve non-consecutive terms, only the second president in history to ever do that, because when he got back in contrast, let's be honest, to the first term, when he walked in the door of the Oval Office, he knew exactly what he was going to do.
Yeah, he knew where that's the old saying. He knew where the men's room was, and he knew how to run the government. And I
even
think
the cabinet. I know for a fact that the first go around, he relied on other people's judgment because he didn't know a lot of these people.
That's true.
And now he knows everybody, and he wants his people, and it will make a huge difference.
Well, I don't want to keep going back to Reagan, but Reagan also in his first term, a lot of the people, as you know, John, because you covered it, you knew Reagan before he was president, but, there were a lot of people who were, never Reagan people who got involved in the Reagan administration, just like there were never Trumpers who got into the Trump administration. I don't think Trump has made that mistake this time, but what do you think about his appointments?
Well, I will just say that with Reagan, remember, he never had both houses of Congress.
That's true.
Donald Trump realizes that even though the Republican margin of the House is narrow, he can push things through. Mm-hmm. And certainly he has done everything from flatter people to bully people to get them to do what he wants.
He's good at both those things.
But I think that there's one thing here that we should remember. People always look at history and say that predetermines the future. Well, it doesn't. Just because most midterm elections have gone against the party in power doesn't always take the case. If a president is viewed as successful or his opposition makes stupid mistakes, there are midterms. that where the president's party has gained seats. And I'll give you an example. The House, the Republicans have a 5-seat majority. Well, the Cook Political Report, which got the 2024 House margin down exactly right, says there are 18 toss-up seats. If you divided them evenly in 2026, the Republicans would gain 2 seats. They'd have a bigger majority than they have now. I don't think it is inevitable the Republicans lose the House. And as for the Senate, and I think Ralph will agree with this, not only are there seats like Georgia, where Ralph is from, that are in play, but Minnesota is winnable. Donald Trump only lost it by 4 points, and he lost it only by 1 point against Hillary Clinton. And there's also Michigan, which Donald Trump has carried twice now. So I believe, especially if Gene Shaheen in New Hampshire retires, he's 78 years old, Democratic incumbent, that seat's in play. So I think Donald Trump may get a second win. Remember, Ronald Reagan accomplished a lot in foreign policy and regulatory policy in the last 2 years of his second term. He wasn't sitting back and doing nothing.
Yeah. So, which brings us to, by the way, we have a break in about a minute and a half. So, Ralph, just a quick answer on this. But, I was mentioning earlier this cartoon that we had in the hotline of two donkeys behind the wheel of a car, and it keeps going around in circles. And the caption is, the GPS keeps telling us to turn left, turn left, turn left. The Democrats seem to be floundering right now. They don't have a message. They're against even the most popular of Trump's ideas. They're leaderless. When Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is their guy, in first place in their early polls. What do they do?
Yeah, I actually have a theory on that, and it is that political parties do not course correct after only one devastating defeat.
Good point. They may have to lose again.
It takes 2 or more. Okay,
yeah.
So after the Democrats lost in 80 and Jimmy Carter was defeated in a landslide, carrying only 7 states, as I recall, did they course correct? No, they nominated his vice president, who promised to raise taxes. Right. After we lost in 2008, did we course correct? No. We went with a standard establishment playbook, and it takes 2 or more consecutive defeats.
All right, Ralph, hold that thought. We got to take a quick break. We'll be back with Ralph Reed and John Fund. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Love, exciting and new.
Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever.
It's a love.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships to Bermudan and British Registry.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I've always said on this show that I'm far from the best radio talk show host, but I do get some of the best guests in the business. And we have two of the sharpest political minds in America on with us right now, Ralph Reed, who runs Faith and Freedom Foundation, and John Fund, who you know him from the Wall Street Journal, from National Review, from Unleashed Prosperity, from Fox News. He is everywhere. Gentlemen, thanks again for joining. The thing that I think is interesting about our previous discussion about the Democrats, and I don't want to dwell on them too much, but John, Ralph is right. It took actually Democrats 3 losses. They lost in 80, 84, and 88, and they finally got their act together, and they got a centrist, moderate Democrat in Bill Clinton, and they won. They won with the moderate, centrist. And they had something called the Democratic Leadership Coalition or something.
Democratic Leadership Council.
And it worked for them. And by the way, I'm a fan of Bill Clinton. I think what he did on the economy was pretty fantastic. But I don't see that. I don't see any movement at all in the Democratic Party to move to the center.
Well, the problem they have is this. They have developed a self-reinforcing cancel culture. So if anybody steps out of line, they're going to be shouted down and exiled off the island.
The island's getting pretty small, John. There aren't too many inhabitants on that island anymore.
Well, look, if I were a Democrat, I would say we're only 3 seats away from a House majority. We just had some bad breaks in the Senate. Trump is going to make mistakes. So they're still in that dream loop, I call it. But the real problem is with the Democrats is this. They are a group of competing special interest groups that are parasitical because they feed on government funding. The genius of what Trump and Musk are doing these first 3 weeks is this. Ronald Reagan talked about defunding the left. Ralph remembers that. But he never had the power or the skilled people to do it. Now he does, Trump. We have that in Trump. And if we cut off their air hose, their supply of federal money, all of these NGOs, these nonprofit groups, these parasitical labor institutes, that basically, and the universities, if we can cut off their money, they'll start fighting amongst themselves and cannibalizing themselves.
Yes.
That's the key. Follow the money. And Trump
follow the money.
And Musk are onto this.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, one of the things that I've been urging, because we're very involved in this tax bill, we've got to get this tax bill done. And Ralph Reed, my idea is, why don't we tax these endowments of these universities that they're now lowering their tuitions? They're just massive storehouses of financial wealth that was never taxed. And look, I'm in favor of tax. I'm an anti-tax guy, but why should we be subsidizing these massive universities the way that we do?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. And I think it's one thing if a major university like a Harvard or a Yale has a $1 billion endowment, and you need that funding for capital improvements but
it's Ralph, it's $100 billion.
I know, that's my point. But I don't know what the number is, but if you just take the top ones, I think it's north of $1 trillion.
Yes.
And I think at a minimum, at a bare minimum, Steve.
Yes.
And I'm an anti-tax guy and I'm anti-regulation. But if you're not using these funds and the income thrown off from it for specific purposes related to core educational functions, then I absolutely agree with you. There ought to be some kind of revenue to the government so that the government can do what these universities are not.
Yeah, I mean, what's the joke that Harvard is actually just a big financial institution now? It's not even a university, or like that's secondary.
It's a private equity fund masquerading as
that's
an
right,
institution
exactly.
of higher education.
So I wanted to talk to you guys about advice that you would give, because you two are been in the game a long time. I am concerned, John Fund and Ralph Reed, about the tax bill. I'm paid to worry. We have got to get this done. We have to make the Trump tax cut permanent. We got a president who has a high approval rating. He has a mandate from the voters. He's got a Republican House, Republican Senate. John, I am sick and tired of these Republicans dragging their feet, not getting this tax bill done. Look, it should have been H.R. 1. We should have voted to make the tax cuts permanent right out of the gate. They're making it much harder. I know I talk with Larry Kudlow agrees with me. Steve Forbes agrees with me. Why is this taking so long? Why are they making it so hard?
Look, in 1982, Reagan's first midterm, we were in the middle of a deep recession. Unemployment hit 10%.
I remember.
It was very difficult for Ronald Reagan after he passed the tax bill to get anything else done. Donald Trump is not in that position, and I think we can avoid a recession. What Trump has to do is this. In this case, his bullying is going to be put to very good use. He has to go in front of the Republicans in Congress and say, look, I know you want to save these Green New Deal projects that are being built in your district. Ridiculous. I know you want to do this. I know you want to do that. I know you want to have SALT taken away completely, the tax code. And the answer is no, you cannot do this. I am your leader. We all either hang together or we hang separately. I need your vote on this. You will vote on this, and I will primary if you don't do that. Now, under normal circumstances, you can overdo those kind of tactics. But on something as fundamental as this, extending the Trump tax cuts, cutting regulations, and cutting wasteful spending, even if it's in Republican districts, Trump has to put it all on the line and say, this is it. I need your vote.
So, Ralph, I'd love your recommendation here because I'm pulling my hair out right now. And even some of my friends and your friends that are, fiscal conservatives, but they're saying, well, they're holding the tax bill hostage to get other, spending cuts. I don't think that's a wise strategy. I want to get the victory. I want it now because, Ralph, the longer we wait, the more in jeopardy it becomes. So what is your advice?
Well, I think speed is critical. And you remember Lyndon Johnson's old phrase, he was one of the most capable legislative leaders we ever had. And fortunately he taped himself saying some of this stuff to congressional leaders. In his case, it was civil rights legislation. And he said, look, if you leave this thing laying around on the beach, it starts to stink like a mackerel in the moonlight.
Right.
If you got the votes, you go.
Do it.
You go now. You go immediately.
Yes.
So that's number one. Number two, the other piece of advice that I would have is don't make the mistake that unfortunately we did under Reagan, where we delayed the effective date of tax cuts.
Great point.
Remember? The tax cuts were passed in August of 1981, and they didn't take effect until October of 81.
No, I'm sorry. Hold on. They weren't actually, you've got 90% right, but actually the full phase in on the tax cut didn't actually happen until October of 82.
Well, you're right, because what they did, remember, instead of making it the 33% Kemp-Roth cut, they made it 25, and it was 5-10-10.
Right.
We need to make this the deepest rate cut. And again, you know this better than anybody. The emphasis is not on the dollar amount. The emphasis is on the marginal rate. That's the prospective income they'll earn if they're entrepreneurial and productive. So get it as low as you can and make it retroactive to January 1 of this year.
Yeah, well put. I couldn't agree more. And John Fund, why you and I and Ralph have lived with the Congressional Budget Office now for 40 years. They always get it wrong. They use static revenue analysis that always overstates the cost of a tax cut. I'm sick to my stomach that the Congressional Budget Office is saying that this tax cut, the making the Trump tax cut permanent, which is the current policy, which is these rates, they're saying it's going to cost $4 trillion. That's insanity. I mean, we got more revenue in from this tax bill and they're saying it's going to cost $4 trillion. what can we do about this? Why are we using this crazy baseline?
I think that Trump can play one of two cards at the end if he has to. One of them is simply say, you don't have to accept the Congressional Budget Office numbers. They've been wrong too often for too long. We're going to use a separate set of numbers developed by the Office of Management and Budget, and Congress can accept them. Secondly, and Steve, you can explain this better to the listeners, the first President Bush, the second President Bush was told, it is unfair for people to pay capital gains taxes on their houses or their investments or their baseball card collection or whatever it is, not factoring in inflation.
Yes.
And I think if Trump simply did that by executive order, and I think he has his Treasury Secretary in Scott Bessent who would do it, that would revolutionize the economy, and he can go to the Republicans and say, we're going to have a 1-2 punch. We're not only going to pass the kind of tax cut that Ralph Reed mentioned, but we're also going to create an explosion of investment and churning of assets that have been underutilized and not put into play by redefining capital gains taxation for average people as well as companies.
That's a good one. That's a high priority.
Great idea, John. Great idea.
Yeah, it is. And it wasn't a big issue for the last 25 years or so because we didn't have much inflation. But guess what? Under Biden, we had, 25% raise in costs, and we should do that one. But, Ralph, I just want to mention to you, and, I want to mention to our listeners and that what we did in the tax cut, because a lot of people don't really understand what an incredible achievement this was. We lowered their business tax rate from the highest in the world to one of the lowest to make America more competitive. We cut small business taxes by 20% because small businesses create most of the jobs in America. We took most Americans now don't have to itemize their deductions, Ralph, because only 9% of Americans itemize their deduction, which was a huge simplification. You just check the box, you get the standard deduction. We increased the child credit for American families. Remember the alternative minimum tax? That's gone. We essentially got rid of the alternative minimum tax. I could go on and on. We allowed businesses to immediately expense their capital purchases when they want to build a plant or equipment or machinery to make them more productive. These things will all go away, Ralph, on January 1st if we don't get this tax cut done. And so failure is not an option. And if the Republicans, I'm sorry, I just feel so strongly about this. If Republicans want to lose Congress, don't get this tax cut done because the Americans are going to revolt against Republicans if we don't get this done.
Steve, you couldn't be more right. Look, we've seen this movie before, okay?
Yep.
In the first Trump term, what was the thing that most Republicans ran on in 2010, 2012, 2014, and 2016? They ran on repealing Obamacare.
Yeah.
They voted 61 different times in the House alone to repeal Obamacare. Trump becomes president, says he will sign it. We failed by one vote in the Senate, but we had a lot of drama before that. You may remember members of the Freedom Caucus refused to support the original bill. We completely screwed the pooch on this, and we were dreadfully punished by the voters. It will happen again if we don't not only make the Trump tax cut permanent, Steve, but if we do the kinds of things that you and Larry Kudlow and Art Laffer and other great minds in the party economically say we need to do to make the bill even better, and we've got to do it. It is not optional. It has to be done, and it has to be done forthwith. And if not, the voters are going to say, you ran promising to do this, you won on the economy, you failed to do it, and now you're out.
Yeah. So we've just got a few minutes left. Great points, gentlemen. I just like your reaction, Ralph, to what Elon Musk is doing. You represent the cultural conservatives in the Republican conservative movement, and it's always shocked me that Trump is so popular with your members. I remember I spoke at your conference. I think you had 1,200 people there, and they were wildly enthusiastic about Trump. What is it about Trump that Christian Republicans and conservative social conservatives love about Trump.
Well, at the risk of sounding like Trump himself, it was closer to 4,000, Steve.
Okay. Okay.
It was a huge crowd, and the reason why they admire him so much, and why they so enthusiastically support him. And by the way, he won 84% of the evangelical vote last November.
That's incredible.
Is because while a lot of other people paid them lip service and patronized them and promised to do things like appoint pro-life justices to the Supreme Court, things like defunding Planned Parenthood, things like standing up for religious freedom and stopping discrimination against Christians and others of faith, Trump delivered. He said he would do something, and he delivered. And on the social, moral, and cultural issues, these voters know there has never been anyone, nothing against Reagan, nothing against the Bushes. I mean, I worked for them all.
Yeah,
okay?
sure.
I'm not being critical of anybody else. I'm just saying, who else gave us 3 pro-life justices?
It's amazing.
In a single term. The answer is no one.
So, John Fund, do you have any final thoughts? We've got about 45 seconds, but Elon Musk seems like he wants to be the co-president.
Well, Musk and Trump did an interview that has been previewed already. It'll be on Sean Hannity's Fox show on Tuesday at 9 o'clock, in which Hannity says, look, the left is trying to divide the two of you. Time Magazine put Musk on the cover as president. They're trying to basically stoke Trump's ego and vanity and divide them. And they both sat and agreed with each other. We're not going to let that happen. And so nice try, but it's not going to work.
Right. We've got to leave it there. Ralph Reed, John Fund, thanks so much for carving time out on your Saturday afternoon.